Imagine a galaxy thousands of years before the rise of the Empire, a time when the Sith were not hidden in shadows, operating in pairs according to an ancient rule. Instead, picture an era when darkness manifested openly, when entire armadas flew under crimson banners, when Sith Lords numbered in the hundreds and commanded vast territories through fear and absolute power. This was the Old Republic era, a period spanning millennia where the eternal struggle between light and darkness played out on a scale that would dwarf the conflicts of later ages. Now imagine into this tumultuous epoch, a child is born. Not just any child, but one conceived by the Force itself, carrying within his cells a concentration of midi-chlorians that surpasses any being in recorded history. A boy destined to reshape the galaxy, whose choices would echo through the ages. But instead of growing up as a slave on Tatooine during the final centuries of the Republic, this child draws his first breath during an age when the Sith Empire stands as a recognized galactic power, when the Jedi Order numbers tens of thousands, and when the very concept of balance hangs by the thinnest of threads. This is the story of what might have been if Anakin Skywalker had been born not in the twilight of the Republic, but in the chaotic dawn of the Old Republic era. A tale of how one soul, blessed and cursed with unprecedented power, might have altered the course of galactic history in ways both terrible and magnificent. The Old Republic era stretched across thousands of years, a vast expanse of time that witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Unlike the relatively stable republic that would exist millennia later, this period was defined by constant upheaval. The Jedi Order, though ancient and respected, had not yet codified all of its teachings into the rigid doctrine that would characterize the prequel era. Masters and students explored the Force with a sense of discovery that later generations would lose, seeking understanding rather than simply maintaining tradition. During this time, approximately 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the galaxy found itself locked in perpetual struggle. The Mandalorian Wars had recently ravaged countless worlds, testing the resolve of both the Jedi and the Republic. In the aftermath, two Jedi heroes, Revan and Malak, had mysteriously disappeared into the unknown regions, only to return transformed into Sith Lords commanding a massive fleet. The Jedi Civil War that followed left scars across the galaxy, demonstrating that the greatest threats to peace often came from within the Order itself. It was into this volatile landscape that our story begins. On a remote world far from the major hyperspace lanes, in a small settlement where Republic influence barely reached, a woman named Shmi Skywalker lived in circumstances similar to those she would know in another timeline. She worked as a servant, her freedom limited by economic necessity if not outright slavery. And one day, without explanation, without the touch of any man, she discovered herself with child. The pregnancy defied all natural explanation. Medical examinations revealed nothing abnormal except for one extraordinary detail. When blood samples were analyzed, the midi-chlorian count registered at levels that broke every known instrument designed to measure such things. The readings were so impossibly high that technicians assumed equipment malfunction. But when tested again and again, the results remained constant.
This child, still growing in the womb, possessed a connection to the Force that theoretically should not exist.
Shmi knew nothing of midi-chlorians or prophecies. She knew only that her son was special, that the Force itself seemed to whisper to her in dreams, showing her visions of a future both glorious and terrible. She named him Anakin, a name that meant nothing in particular but felt right, as though the syllables themselves carried weight in the Force. The child grew quickly, displaying abilities that both amazed and frightened those around him. Before he could walk, objects would move at his command, floating through the air in response to his infant whims. By the time he reached 3 years of age, he could sense the emotions of everyone nearby, sometimes overwhelming himself with the flood of feelings from others. His mother learned to shield her thoughts as best she could, sensing that her son's mind touched hers in ways that should have been impossible for one so young. Word of the unusual child eventually reached the ears of the Jedi. Unlike the later era where the Order's influence had waned, during this period the Jedi maintained a vast network of watchers who sought out Force-sensitive children throughout the galaxy. When reports filtered back to the Jedi Enclave on Dantooine of a child whose abilities manifested before proper age, who seemed to bend reality simply by willing it, 3 Jedi Masters made the journey to investigate. Master Vandar Tokare, ancient even by the standards of his long-lived species, led the expedition. Standing barely higher than a human child, his diminutive stature belied a wisdom accumulated over centuries of service to the Force. Accompanying him were Master Vrook Lamar, whose stern demeanor and unwavering dedication to Jedi doctrine made him both respected and feared among the younger generation, and Master Kavar, a warrior scholar who embodied the balance between combat prowess and deep philosophical understanding. The 3 masters sensed the boy's presence in the Force long before they reached the settlement. His signature blazed like a star, impossible to miss, radiating power that dwarfed even the strongest Jedi they had known. As they approached the humble dwelling where Shmi Skywalker lived with her son, Vandar paused, his large eyes widening with an emotion rarely seen on his ancient face: uncertainty. When they finally met young Anakin, then 5 years old, the boy regarded them with eyes that seemed far older than his years. He had been building a complex machine from scavenged parts, his small hands manipulating components with a precision that suggested both natural talent and Force guidance. The device, when activated, generated a localized field that could detect approaching vessels through hyperspace, a feat that would have challenged trained engineers many times his age. Master Brook's first impulse was to reject the child. He sensed not just power, but the potential for catastrophic imbalance. The boy was too old by their standards, his personality already formed, his attachments to his mother deep and unbreakable. The code was clear. Jedi were to be taken young, before such bonds could form, before fear and desire could root themselves in fertile soil.
But Master Vandar felt something different.
Standing before this child, he perceived echoes of an ancient prophecy, one that spoke of a being who would bring balance to the Force. The prophecy had been debated for generations, its meaning never entirely clear. Did balance mean the eradication of the dark side? Or did it suggest something more nuanced, a harmony between opposing forces that transcended simple notions of good and evil? Kavar observed the boy's interaction with his mother, noting the love between them, but also something else, a protectiveness that bordered on possessiveness. Even at 5 years old, Anakin demonstrated a fierce determination to shield Shmi from any perceived threat. When Master Vrook spoke curtly to her, questioning her about the boy's father, young Anakin stepped between them, his small hand raised, and suddenly the stern Jedi Master found himself pushed back by an invisible force, stumbling despite his considerable power and experience. The display settled the debate. This child could not be left untrained. His power was too great, too dangerous. If the Jedi did not guide him, then the darkness surely would. The Sith Empire, though currently locked in its own internal struggles for supremacy, always sought beings of exceptional ability. Should word of this child reach the wrong ears, the consequences could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. Shmi Skywalker faced an impossible choice. Let her son go with these strange mystics, knowing she would likely never see him again, or keep him close and risk his potential turning to destruction. Anakin, sensing his mother's distress, declared that he would not leave her.
The conviction in his voice, the raw determination in eyes so young, sent ripples through the Force that all three masters felt distinctly.
Master Vanda made a decision that broke with tradition. Rather than separate mother and child immediately, he arranged for Shmi to travel with them to Dantooine. She would be provided for, given work and housing near the Enclave, allowed to see her son during his initial training. It was unprecedented, a deviation from protocols established over millennia. Master Vrook protested vehemently, arguing that attachments would doom the boy's training. But Vandar's word carried weight, and the arrangement stood. The journey to Dantooine took several days, during which the masters observed Anakin constantly. The boy demonstrated an intuitive grasp of mechanical systems that went far beyond normal aptitude. He could sense the flow of energy through circuits, feel the stress points in metal and composite materials. When a hyperdrive coupling began to fail during their journey, Anakin noticed before any of the ship's sophisticated monitoring systems, pointing to the exact component that needed replacement. More troubling was his emotional volatility. One moment the child would be laughing, filled with wonder at the stars streaming past in hyperspace. The next, sensing some perceived slight to his mother, his mood would darken, and the temperature in the cabin would drop as his unconscious connection to the Force manifested his anger. The masters worked with him during these moments, teaching him the first lessons of control, showing him how to breathe through his emotions rather than being consumed by them. When they finally arrived at Dantooine, Anakin experienced his first true glimpse of the Jedi Order's scope and grandeur. The Enclave stood as a monument to ancient wisdom, its stone corridors echoing with the footsteps of generations of Force users who had walked these halls. Training rooms where students practiced with lightsabers and learned to move objects with their minds. Libraries containing thousands of years of accumulated knowledge. Meditation chambers where masters sought communion with the Force, pursuing understanding that transcended mere power. The Jedi Council convened to decide Anakin's fate. Unlike the small group that had discovered him, this assembly included some of the most powerful and influential figures in the Order. Master Zar Leston, renowned for his patience and skill as a teacher. Master Dorak, the chronicler who maintained the Order's vast historical records. And through a holocommunicator, several masters from the main temple on Coruscant observed, their flickering blue forms adding their voices to the deliberation. The debate raged for hours. Some argued that Anakin represented a threat too great to embrace, that his power combined with his age and attachments created a recipe for disaster. Others saw potential for unprecedented good, a champion who could stand against the rising darkness that perpetually threatened the Republic. The fact that the Sith Empire existed openly during this era, not hidden as they would be in later centuries, made the need for powerful defenders all the more acute. Master Vrook remained the strongest voice against training the boy. He cited precedent after precedent of promising students who had fallen to the dark side, noting that power without proper foundation inevitably led to corruption. The more powerful the student, the more catastrophic their fall. If this boy, blessed with abilities that surpassed even Grand Master-level Jedi, should turn to darkness, what force could possibly stop him? But Master Vandar countered each argument with quiet wisdom. Yes, the boy was old by their standards. Yes, he possessed dangerous attachments. Yes, his power might one day eclipse them all. But these facts did not change a fundamental truth. The Force had created this child for a purpose. to turn him away was to ignore the will of the Force itself, to place their fear above their faith in the very energy field they served. In the end, the Council reached a decision through compromise. Anakin would be accepted into the Order, but his training would be carefully monitored. Rather than assigning him to a single master as was traditional, he would learn from multiple instructors, each specializing in different aspects of Jedi knowledge and discipline. This approach, while unusual, would ensure no single teacher's blind spots could lead the boy astray. Master Kavar volunteered to oversee Anakin's combat training. A master of multiple lightsaber forms, Kavar recognized that the boy would need to channel his abundant energy into physical discipline. The precision and focus required for lightsaber combat could serve as meditation in motion, teaching control through action. Master Dorak would guide his intellectual development, exposing him to the history of both Jedi and Sith, ensuring he understood the patterns that led to the dark side's corruption. Knowledge, Dorak believed, was the first defense against temptation. If Anakin understood how others had fallen, he might avoid their mistakes. Master Zar would teach him the fundamentals of Force use, from the simplest telekinetic exercises to the complex meditation techniques that allowed Jedi to commune with the cosmic force. Zar's legendary patience would be tested by a student whose natural abilities made traditional lesson plans almost irrelevant. But the old master accepted the challenge with characteristic grace, and Master Vrook, despite his reservations, agreed to instruct Anakin in the Jedi Code itself, in the philosophy and ethics that separated Jedi from Sith. If the boy was to avoid darkness, he needed to understand not just what the Jedi stood for, but why. The principles that guided them, the sacrifices required to maintain balance between power and restraint. As Anakin's training began, the masters quickly discovered that teaching him was unlike anything they had experienced. Techniques that took other students years to master, Anakin grasped in days. When Master Jar demonstrated how to lift a training remote using the Force, Anakin not only duplicated the feat immediately, but lifted 3 remotes simultaneously, holding them in a perfect orbital pattern around his head. In lightsaber practice with Master Kavar, the boy showed natural talent that bordered on prescience. He seemed to know where his opponent's blade would be before they struck, his defensive movements flowing with a fluid grace that suggested deep connection to the Force's guiding currents. Within weeks, he had progressed beyond basic forms, his body adapting to complex sequences that normally required years of repetition to internalize. But power came with challenges. Anakin struggled with patience, wanting to rush ahead to more advanced techniques before fully understanding the foundational principles. His competitiveness emerged when training alongside other younglings, his need to excel sometimes crossing the line into arrogance. When other students succeeded where he stumbled, frustration would cloud his judgment, and the Force around him would crackle with barely suppressed emotion. Master Vrook watched these developments with growing concern. In private councils with his fellow masters, he expressed fear that they were nurturing a storm that would one day consume them. The boy's attachment to his mother had not lessened despite their attempts to help him accept their separation. Anakin still visited Shmi regularly, clinging to those moments with a desperation that suggested he feared losing her. These fears proved prescient when, 6 months into Anakin's training, Shmi fell ill. What began as a minor ailment progressed rapidly, and the Enclave's healers found themselves baffled by her declining condition. Young Anakin, sensing his mother's distress through their bond, became increasingly distraught. His training suffered as he spent every free moment at her bedside, his presence in the Force growing darker with each day that she weakened. The masters debated whether to intervene more directly, but Dantooine's medical facilities, while adequate for most purposes, lacked the advanced equipment that might have saved her. Anakin begged them to take her to Coruscant, to the great medical centers of the Republic capital, but the journey would take days, and Shmi's condition was deteriorating too rapidly. In desperation, 10-year-old Anakin attempted something no student of his level should have been able to conceive, let alone execute. Drawing on reserves of power that frightened even the most experienced masters, he tried to use the Force to heal his mother directly, to pour his own life energy into her failing body. The attempt sent shockwaves through the Enclave as the boy's power surged, reality itself seeming to bend around him. For a moment, it appeared he might succeed. Shmi's breathing steadied. Color returned to her cheeks, but the technique required knowledge and control far beyond Anakin's understanding. The energy he channeled began to spiral out of his control, threatening both mother and son. Master Kaver had to physically intervene, pulling the boy away even as Anakin screamed in protest, fighting with strength enhanced by desperate Force exertion. Shmi Skywalker died that night despite all efforts to save her. And something in Anakin Skywalker died with her. The boy's grief was so profound, so all-consuming, that it manifested as a disturbance in the Force that spread throughout the Enclave. Plants withered, stone cracked, small creatures fled in instinctive terror from the waves of anguish rolling off the child. The Masters faced an impossible situation. Before them stood a child whose power already rivaled their own, consumed by grief so intense it threatened to tear him apart. Master Zar attempted to comfort Anakin through the Force, projecting calm and peace, but the boy's mental defenses, strengthened by raw, emotional agony, rebuffed even such gentle intervention. Master Vrook argued for immediate action, for measures that would contain the threat before it manifested into something worse. But Master Vandar counseled patience, reminding them all that compassion, not fear, must guide their response. In the days following Shmi's death, Anakin withdrew into himself. He attended training sessions mechanically, his movements precise but empty of the passion that had characterized his earlier progress. When sparring with other students, he held back, seemingly afraid of his own strength. The darkness that had threatened to overwhelm him during his mother's final hours now lurked beneath the surface, a presence the Masters could sense, but not quite touch. Master Kavir recognized the danger signs. He had seen Jedi before who suppressed their grief rather than processing it, allowing pain to fester until it poisoned everything around it. During their private training sessions, he encouraged Anakin to channel his emotions into his lightsaber forms, to use the physical exertion as a release valve for feelings too intense to simply meditate away. The approach showed some success. When Anakin really fought, some of the darkness seemed to drain away, expelled through the outlet of controlled violence. But Master Vrook saw a different pattern emerging. The boy was learning to hide, to present a facade of calm while inside, turmoil raged. In their philosophical discussions, Anakin would recite the code flawlessly, demonstrating intellectual understanding of Jedi principles. Yet Vrook sensed that the words remained external, never quite penetrating to the boy's core. Anakin learned what answers his teachers wanted to hear, and he provided those answers with increasing skill, all while keeping his true thoughts carefully shielded. This ability to compartmentalize, to separate his public persona from his private anguish, might have served Anakin well if not for the attention it attracted from beyond the Enclave's walls. The Old Republic era, unlike later periods, saw regular contact between Jedi and Sith. Not cooperative contact certainly, but acknowledgement of each other's existence. Sith spies operated throughout Republic space, and the surge of dark emotion that accompanied Shmi's death had not gone unnoticed. On Dromund Kaas, the hidden capital of the Sith Empire, reports reached the desk of Darth Malgus. one of the most powerful Sith Lords of the age. Malgus, whose philosophy embraced strength through conflict and whose contempt for weakness drove him to constantly test himself against the strongest opponents, found his interest piqued by descriptions of a Jedi child whose power signature rivaled that of the mightiest masters. More intriguing still were the notes about the boy's emotional volatility, his attachment to his deceased mother, his struggle with darkness. Malgus understood something that many Jedi refused to accept. Darkness was not an external force that corrupted the unwary. It was inherent in all beings, a natural counterbalance to light. The Jedi's insistence on denying this fundamental truth created weaknesses that Sith could exploit. A student taught to suppress negative emotions rather than harness them became like a dam holding back a river. Eventually, the pressure would overwhelm the structure and the resulting flood would be catastrophic. He dispatched agents to Dantooine not to kidnap the boy or attack the Enclave, but simply to observe, to wait. Patience, Malgus knew, was a virtue that served darkness as well as light. The boy would stumble eventually. They all did. And when that moment came, when Anakin Skywalker's carefully constructed mental defenses finally cracked, the Sith would be ready to offer an alternative to the Jedi's rigid code. Months passed. Anakin continued his training, advancing through the ranks with a speed that made his instructors both proud and concerned. At 12 years old, he was already more skilled than many Jedi Knights. His lightsaber technique polished to near perfection, his force abilities expanding in unexpected directions. He discovered an affinity for mechanical systems that went beyond simple understanding. He could sense the flow of energy through technology, interface with machines in ways that suggested the Force itself was bridging the gap between organic consciousness and artificial intelligence. Master Dorak found this ability particularly fascinating, noting parallels to ancient Sith techniques that had been lost to time. The Sith had once created holocrons, infused with their essence, technological artifacts that retained their knowledge and personality even after death. Could Anakin's natural talent for connecting with machines be related to whatever force mechanism had allowed such creations?
The implications troubled Dorak, though he kept his concerns private, not wanting to poison the boy's relationship with his gift through unwarranted suspicion.
During this period, Anakin formed his first genuine friendships with other students at the Enclave. A Twi'lek girl named Kavi, whose own abilities with force healing had marked her as exceptional, saw past Anakin's defenses to the wounded child beneath. She didn't push, didn't demand he share his pain, but simply offered companionship without expectation. In her presence, Anakin could relax, could allow himself moments of genuine happiness that had been absent since his mother's death. There was also Jax Pavan, a human boy 3 years Anakin's senior, whose prowess in combat made him a natural sparring partner. Jax's confidence bordered on cockiness, but unlike others who treated Anakin with either wariness or awe, Jax saw him simply as another student, another rival to test himself against. Their duels became legendary among the younglings, exhibitions of skill that drew crowds of observers, including the masters themselves. But darkness was patient, and it wore many faces. One of the Sith agents watching the Enclave was a woman named Darth Melora, whose specialty lay in psychological manipulation rather than brute force. She studied Anakin from afar, noting his relationships, his patterns, his vulnerabilities, and she crafted a plan that did not require confrontation or overt corruption. Sometimes the most effective way to turn someone toward darkness was simply to remove the light that kept them grounded. The attack came during a routine training expedition. Master Kavor had taken a group of advanced students, including Anakin, Kavi, and Jax, to explore ancient ruins on Dantooine's far continent. The site, remnants of an even older Jedi settlement, offered lessons in history and archaeology, practical experience in dealing with unknown environments and potential hazards. It should have been safe, well within the Enclave's protective sphere. But Darth Malora had arranged for a group of mercenaries, well armed and trained to counter Jedi abilities, to ambush the expedition. The attack was brutal and unexpected. Master Kavara reacted with the speed and skill that had made him legendary, his crimson lightsaber blazing as he positioned himself between his students and the attackers. He called for the younglings to flee, to reach the transport and escape while he held off the mercenaries. Anakin wanted to stay, to fight alongside his master. His combat skills were advanced enough that he could have contributed meaningfully to the battle, but Kabar's command was absolute, delivered with force-enhanced authority that compelled obedience. The students ran, Anakin leading the way, with Caviai and Jax close behind. They almost made it to the transport before the second phase of Malora's plan activated. Explosive devices placed along their escape route detonated in sequence. The blast didn't kill the students, but separated them, cutting off their paths, forcing them to scatter. Anakin found himself alone, dust and smoke obscuring his vision, when he heard Caviai's scream through the Force. He ran toward her location, driven by instinct and friendship, emerging from the smoke to find her cornered by 3 armed mercenaries. Their weapons were trained on her, fingers on triggers, and Anakin knew with absolute certainty that they would fire before he could reach her. Time seemed to slow as adrenaline and the Force flooded his system. He reached out, not with his hands but with his mind, and pulled. The mercenaries' weapons tore free from their grips, spinning through the air to embed themselves harmlessly in the ground meters away.
But Anakin's focus was absolute, his connection to the Force deeper than it had ever been, and he kept pulling.
The mercenaries themselves flew backward, their bodies ragdolls in the grip of invisible hands, and slammed into the ancient stone walls of the ruins with bone-breaking force. When Anakin's awareness returned fully, he stood in the center of a circle of broken bodies. None of the mercenaries moved. The Force whispered to him that they would never move again. He had killed them, not with lightsaber or blaster, but with pure application of telekinetic force, using his anger and fear for Caviai's safety as fuel for power that exceeded anything he had accessed in controlled training. Caviai looked at him with eyes wide with shock, and something else. Fear. Not fear of the mercenaries, but fear of Anakin himself, of what he had just done. He wanted to explain, to tell her that he had only been protecting her, that he'd had no choice. But the words stuck in his throat as he felt another presence nearby. Master Kavar, bloodied but alive, having fought off the remaining mercenaries, stood at the edge of the clearing, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene. The journey back to the Enclave was conducted in silence. Caviai wouldn't meet Anakin's eyes. Jax, who had witnessed the aftermath if not the act itself, kept his distance. Master Kavar said nothing, offering neither condemnation nor comfort, and his silence was more painful than any lecture might have been. The Jedi Council convened once more to discuss Anakin's fate. This time, the debate was even more intense. Master Vrook argued that the boy had demonstrated exactly the danger he had warned about from the beginning.
Using the Force to kill in anger, no matter how justified the immediate cause, was a step toward the dark side.
Worse, the power Anakin had displayed suggested that if he continued down this path, there would come a point where no one could stop him. But Master Vandar pointed out that Anakin had acted to save another student, that his intentions had been pure, even if his execution demonstrated poor control.
The boy needed more training, not expulsion.
To cast him out now, traumatized and vulnerable, would virtually guarantee his fall to darkness. Better to keep him close, to guide him through this crisis, than to abandon him to his demons. Master Kavar, whose vote carried significant weight given his presence during the incident, surprised everyone by siding with Vandar. He had sensed Anakin's horror at what he had done, the boy's immediate regret and self-loathing. These were not the responses of someone embracing darkness, but of a student who had made a terrible mistake under extreme pressure. The question was not whether Anakin had fallen, but whether they would help him climb back up. The Council's decision was to continue Anakin's training, but under enhanced supervision. He would be forbidden from leaving the Enclave without direct escort from a Council member. His combat training would focus more on control than on power, emphasizing defensive techniques and the discipline required to fight without giving in to emotion. And he would undergo regular counseling sessions with Master Vandar, working through his grief over his mother, his guilt over the mercenaries, and his fear of his own capabilities. Anakin accepted the restrictions without protest, but inside, something had changed. He had felt the dark side during that battle, felt how anger and fear could transform into power that dwarfed anything he could access through calm meditation. The Jedi taught that such power came with a cost, that it would corrupt and consume. But in the moment when Kaviai's life hung in the balance, that power had been exactly what he needed. It had saved her. The question that haunted him in the weeks that followed was simple yet profound. If the dark side could be used to protect those he cared about, was it truly evil? Or were the Jedi's teachings incomplete, their rigid adherence to light and rejection of darkness just another form of dogma, no different than Sith philosophy in its absolutism? These thoughts were dangerous, and Anakin knew it. He kept them carefully shielded during his sessions with Master Vandar, presenting a facade of the dutiful student working through his trauma. But at night, alone in his quarters, he would meditate on the memory of that power, trying to understand it, to find a way to access it without giving in to the anger that had fueled it.
This was over, and in many ways, as every sentence.
His research led him to restricted sections of the Enclave's archives, areas where ancient texts discussed the nature of the Force in less binary terms than contemporary Jedi teaching. He learned of the Jedi Order, predecessors to modern Jedi who had sought balance between light and dark rather than choosing one over the other. He discovered records of Force users who had walked a gray path, using techniques from both sides without succumbing to corruption. Master Dorak noticed Anakin's growing interest in these historical curiosities and initially encouraged it, seeing the pursuit of knowledge as a healthy outlet for the boy's restless energy. But when Anakin began asking questions about Sith philosophy, about whether their power necessarily required evil intent, or if it could be wielded for noble purposes, Dorak grew concerned. He reported these conversations to the Council, noting that while Anakin had not crossed any lines, his thinking was trending in troubling directions. The Sith agents monitoring the Enclave observed these developments with satisfaction. Darth Malora reported to Darth Malgus that the boy was questioning, doubting, seeking alternatives to Jedi orthodoxy. The seeds of corruption had been planted. Now they needed only time and gentle nurturing to grow. Malgus decided it was time for direct contact. Not an attack, not a kidnapping, but a conversation. He traveled to Dantooine in secret, using Sith techniques to mask his presence in the Force, and waited for an opportunity to speak with the boy alone. That opportunity came during one of Anakin's rare permitted excursions outside the Enclave. Master Zar had granted him permission to visit his mother's grave, a small marker in the settlement where she had lived and died. It was meant to be supervised, but the Jedi assigned to escort Anakin was called away by an urgent summons, a fake emergency arranged by Melora.
The Master believed he would be gone only moments, not nearly long enough for any real danger to manifest.
But Darth Malgus moved quickly. When Anakin knelt beside his mother's grave, lost in grief and memory, a shadow fell across him. He looked up to find a man in dark armor, his face hidden behind a respirator mask, his presence in the Force radiating power that made even Master Kavar seem diminutive by comparison. Anakin's hand went to his lightsaber, but Malgus made no threatening moves. He simply stood there, silent, waiting. When Anakin didn't attack, Malgus spoke, his voice distorted by the mask but carrying an authority that demanded attention. "Peace, young one. I did not come to harm you." The words, delivered in such a calm tone by a being whose very essence screamed danger, created a cognitive dissonance that left Anakin uncertain how to proceed. "You're Sith," Anakin stated, not a question but a fact. The darkness that clung to this stranger was unmistakable. "I am Darth Malgus, and yes, I serve the Empire," Malgus confirmed. "But Sith and enemy are not always synonymous, just as Jedi and friend are not always the same." "I know your pain, young Skywalker. I too have lost someone precious to the uncaring cruelty of the galaxy." Anakin should have fled, should have called for help through the Force, alerting the Masters to this intrusion. But something held him in place. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the recognition of genuine empathy in Malgus's voice, an understanding of loss that the Jedi, for all their wisdom, had never quite managed to convey. "What do you want?" Anakin asked, his hand still on his lightsaber but no longer preparing to ignite it. "To offer you a choice," Malgus replied. "The Jedi tell you that your grief is attachment, that your anger is wrong, that you must let go of everything that makes you human in order to serve the Force. But they lie. Your emotions are not weakness, they are strength. Your attachments do not blind you. They give you something to fight for, something worth protecting." "The dark side corrupts," Anakin countered, reciting lessons learned from Master Vrook. "The dark side reveals," Malgus corrected. "It strips away pretense and shows you who you truly are. Yes, many who embrace it become monsters, but only because they were already monstrous inside, their evil previously hidden behind layers of civilization and restraint. You, Anakin Skywalker, are not evil. Your every instinct is to protect, to save, to prevent the suffering of others. The dark side would not corrupt such purity. It would empower it." The argument was seductive in its simplicity. Anakin had felt the truth of it during the battle at the ruins. His anger had not been selfish, it had been righteous fury at those who would harm Kavi. His fear had not been cowardice, but desperate concern for her safety. If those emotions, properly channeled, could grant power to protect, then perhaps they were not sins to be suppressed, but tools to be mastered. "The Jedi say balance means eliminating darkness," Malgus continued. "But how can you have balance with only one side of the scale? True balance requires both light and dark, held in tension, each restraining the other's excesses. You could be that balance, Anakin. A being powerful enough to draw upon both aspects of the Force without being consumed by either."
Before Anakin could respond to Malgus's proposition, the Sith Lord sensed approaching Jedi.
Master Zar, having discovered the emergency that drew away Anakin's escort was fabricated, rushed to the gravesite with several other masters in tow.
Malgus smiled beneath his mask. a gesture Anakin couldn't see but could somehow sense through the Force.
Think on what I have said, young Skywalker. The offer stands, now and always. When you tire of being told who you must be, when you wish to discover who you could be, seek me out. The Empire welcomes strength wherever it emerges. With those final words, Malgus vanished, not fleeing, but simply dissolving into shadows, using Sith techniques to mask his presence so completely that even the Masters arriving moments later could find no trace of him. Anakin was brought before the Council yet again, this time to explain his encounter with Darth Malgus. He described the conversation truthfully, holding back nothing, and the Masters listened with expressions that ranged from concern to outright alarm. That a Sith Lord would approach one of their students so brazenly, on Dantooine itself, suggested a level of interest that validated their worst fears about Anakin's potential. Master Brooks' arguments for expelling Anakin reached their crescendo. The boy was clearly being targeted by the Sith, marked as a prize to be turned or destroyed. Keeping him at the Enclave endangered every student, every master, the entire institution itself. Better to release him into the Force, to accept that this particular student was beyond their ability to safely train, than to risk catastrophe on a galactic scale. But Master Vandar remained steadfast. Turning Anakin away would not make the Sith lose interest. It would simply remove him from Jedi protection, making their eventual acquisition of him all but inevitable. The proper response was not abandonment, but increased vigilance, stronger training, and above all, trust. If they treated Anakin as a threat, he would become one. If they embraced him as a student with challenges to overcome, he might yet fulfill his potential for good. The compromise reached was severe. Anakin would be assigned a constant guardian, a Jedi Knight who would shadow his every move, monitor his emotional state through the Force, and intervene at the first sign of corruption. Master Kavar volunteered for this duty, recognizing that Anakin responded better to warrior philosophers who understood strength than to purely contemplative masters who viewed combat as a necessary evil rather than a sacred art. Under Kavar's direct tutelage, Anakin's training took on new intensity. They sparred daily, sometimes for hours, pushing the boy's physical limits while simultaneously teaching him to maintain mental discipline under exhaustion and pain. Kavar introduced him to Form V Gem So, a lightsaber style that channeled aggression into powerful attacks while maintaining solid defensive foundations. It was a form that worked with Anakin's natural intensity rather than demanding he suppress it, redirecting rather than restraining. The partnership between master and student deepened into genuine respect. Kavar did not pretend that emotions were wrong or that attachment was inherently evil. Instead, he taught Anakin that the question was not whether to feel, but how to feel without being controlled by those feelings. Love could motivate without becoming obsession. Anger could drive action without descending into hatred. Fear could inspire caution without paralyzing decision-making. These lessons resonated with Anakin in ways that earlier instruction had not. For the first time since his mother's death, he felt understood rather than judged. Kavar acknowledged the darkness within him, didn't recoil from it or demand its elimination, but simply showed him how to keep it balanced against his light. Years passed in this fashion. Anakin progressed through the ranks, officially attaining the rank of Jedi Knight at 17, an age considered incredibly young for such an honor. The ceremony should have been a moment of pure celebration, but it was tinged with uneasiness. Several masters still harbored doubts about Anakin's stability, and their reservations leaked into the Force during the ritual, a discord that Anakin sensed and internalized as rejection. The galaxy during this period was entering another period of heightened tension between Republic and Empire. Diplomatic overtures had failed. Border skirmishes escalated into full battles. The Jedi Council found itself divided on how to respond, with some advocating for peaceful resolution while others argued that only strength would deter Sith aggression. Anakin, listening to these debates, grew frustrated with what he perceived as the Council's inability to act decisively. Darth Malgus, meanwhile, had not forgotten his promising student. Though years had passed since their single conversation, he had monitored Anakin's progress through his network of spies. Reports confirmed what Malgus had sensed during their brief encounter. This boy, now a young man, possessed power that was still growing, still evolving towards something unprecedented.
Malgus's own position within the Sith hierarchy had evolved as well.
His military victories had earned him command of substantial forces, and his philosophy of Sith-ruled meritocracy, where strength determined status regardless of species or origin, had attracted followers who might once have aligned with more traditional Sith ideology. They was not yet Dark Lord, but he was powerful enough that his voice carried weight in the Empire's highest councils. The war that had been brewing finally erupted in full force when a Sith fleet struck at Coruscant itself, attacking the Republic capital in a bold assault that paralleled the historical sacking of Coruscant that occurred in the Old Republic timeline. The Jedi Temple became a battlefield as Sith warriors teleported directly into its halls, their crimson lightsabers clashing against the defenders' varied colors.
Anakin fought during this battle with a ferocity that awed and disturbed those who witnessed it.
He moved through the corridors like a force of nature, his blue blade a blur as he cut down Sith after Sith. But there was something almost mechanical about his efficiency, a coldness that suggested he was distancing himself from the violence, treating it as a problem to solve rather than a tragedy to mourn. Master Carver fought beside him through the worst of the assault, and together they formed a nearly impenetrable defense. Carver's disciplined technique complemented Anakin's raw power, and Sith warriors who might have overwhelmed either fighter individually found themselves facing a partnership that multiplied their combined strength beyond simple addition. The battle reached its climax when Darth Malgus himself teleported into the temple's central chamber, challenging the Jedi defenders to face him. Several Jedi Masters responded, forming a coordinated assault meant to overwhelm even his considerable skills. But Malgus was not merely a skilled duelist, he was a master of Sith sorcery, channeling the dark side to enhance his physical abilities beyond normal limits while simultaneously unleashing force lightning and telekinetic attacks that kept multiple opponents at bay. Anakin, seeing his masters struggling, rushed to join the fight. His arrival changed the dynamic immediately. Where the Masters had been fighting defensively, trying to wear Malgus down, Anakin attacked with aggressive precision, his gem-so strikes forcing the Sith Lord to actually retreat for the first time in the battle. Malgus recognized him instantly, despite the years since their last encounter and the chaos of combat. As their blades locked, Malgus spoke, his voice cutting through the din with eerie clarity. "Young Skywalker, still wasting your potential in service to those who fear what you might become." The words were calculated to distract, to plant seeds of doubt, but Anakin did not waver in his assault. "I know exactly what I am," Anakin replied, his blade work never faltering. "And I choose the light, do you?" Malgus countered, pushing back with strength that sent Anakin skidding backward. "Then why do I sense such darkness roiling beneath your surface? Why do I feel your anger, your frustration, your hatred of those who would harm innocents?" "You are no Jedi, Anakin Skywalker. You are something else, something caught between opposing forces, and that tension will destroy you unless you embrace one side completely." The duel intensified, both fighters drawing deeply on the Force to enhance their speed and strength. Around them, The battle continued, but it seemed to exist in another world, their conflict becoming the focal point of the Force itself. Every strike carried weight beyond the physical, light and dark clashing with such intensity that Force-sensitive beings throughout the temple felt the reverberations. Master Kavar, recognizing the danger his student faced, moved to intervene. But before he could reach them, a Sith assassin struck from the shadows, her blade piercing Kavar through the chest. The Master fell, his connection to the Force flickering like a candle in strong wind, and Anakin felt it through their bond with the clarity of a scream directly into his mind. Time seemed to freeze. Anakin turned from Malgus, saw his master, his mentor, the one person who had truly understood him, dying on the temple floor. The darkness that he had kept carefully controlled, carefully balanced, surged through him with the force of a tidal wave. His anger was not the hot fury of the young boy who had killed mercenaries to save Kaviai. This was cold, absolute, the kind of rage that transcended emotion and became something darker, something almost pure in its terrible clarity. He reached out with the Force, not at Malgus but at the assassin who had struck Kavor down. She had no time to react, no chance to defend, as invisible hands seized her and simply crushed. Her armor imploded, her body compacting in an instant, and then Anakin flung the corpse away with enough force to shatter it against the far wall. The display of raw power shocked even Darth Malgus into momentary stillness. He had sensed the boy's potential, but this was beyond mere potential. This was actual, realized power that rivaled the mightiest Sith Lords. And the boy had accessed it through his attachment, through his love for his fallen master, through the very emotions the Jedi tried to deny. Anakin knelt beside Kavara, his hands hovering over the mortal wound, desperately channeling what Force healing abilities he possessed. But the damage was too severe. Master Kavara's hand rose, trembling, to touch Anakin's face. "Balance," Kavara whispered, his voice barely audible. "Find balance, Anakin. Not light, not dark, but both. Only you can walk that path. Only you." The sentence remained unfinished as Kavar's spirit passed into the Force, leaving Anakin holding an empty shell. Something broke in Anakin Skywalker in that moment. Or perhaps something was finally released. The careful compartmentalization he had maintained for years, the separation between his public persona and his private turmoil, shattered. He stood, turning to face Darth Malgus with eyes that reflected both terrible grief and absolute fury. The Sith Lord recognized his opportunity. "Join me, Anakin. I can teach you to prevent such losses. The dark side grants power over death itself. You could save those you love, protect them as the Jedi never could. All you must do is embrace what you already are." For a heartbeat that seemed to stretch into eternity, Anakin stood on the precipice. Before him lay two paths. He could surrender to his grief, let it pull him into darkness where Malgus promised power and protection for those he cared about. Or he could honor Kavar's final words, seek the balance his master had spoken of, walk a path that neither Jedi nor Sith had truly explored. In that moment of ultimate choice, Anakin Skywalker made a decision that would reshape galactic history. But it was not the decision that either the Jedi or the Sith expected. He channeled his grief, his anger, his love for his fallen master into the Force. But he did not use it to destroy. Instead, he directed it outward, pushing with such overwhelming power that every Sith warrior in the temple was literally thrown from the building, teleported through solid walls to land stunned but alive in the Coruscant streets far below. Even Darth Malgus, for all his strength, could not resist the wave of Force energy that swept him away. The effort left Anakin drained, falling to his knees beside Kyber's body. But he had driven the Sith from the temple without killing, without giving in to the easy path of destruction. He had found, in that instant of perfect balance between light and dark, a power that transcended both. The Jedi Council, observing what Anakin had accomplished, faced a moment of truth. This display of power should have terrified them. By all their understanding, what Anakin had done was impossible. He had channeled dark emotions to fuel a light side action, had merged opposing aspects of the Force into something new. Master Vandar proposed a controversial resolution. Anakin would be neither expelled nor constrained. Instead, he would be given freedom to explore this new path he had discovered, with the understanding that he would teach others what he learned. The Order would evolve, adapting to incorporate Anakin's insights about balance, or it would stagnate and eventually fall to the same patterns that had led to conflict for millennia.
Not all masters agreed.
Master Vrook argued passionately that this decision would doom the Order, that allowing Anakin to experiment with the boundaries between light and dark would lead to catastrophe. But he was outvoted, and the decision stood. Anakin spent the following years exploring this new understanding of the Force. He developed techniques that drew upon emotion without being ruled by it, that acknowledged darkness without surrendering to it. He trained students who showed aptitude for this balanced approach, creating what he called the Gray Path, acknowledging that it walked the line between traditional Jedi and Sith philosophies. His teachings attracted attention from across the galaxy. Some Jedi joined him, seeing in his methods a solution to the Order's historical rigidity. Some Sith sought him out as well, individuals who were weary of the constant internal power struggles and saw in Anakin's philosophy a way to use their power without becoming monsters. Darth Malgus watched these developments with complex emotions. Part of him was frustrated that Anakin had not simply joined the Empire, but another part, the philosophical revolutionary who had always questioned traditional Sith doctrine, saw potential in what Anakin was building. Perhaps this gray path could be the synthesis that would finally end the eternal war between light and dark. The galactic situation evolved into an uneasy truce. The Sith Empire, the Jedi Order, and Anakin's growing Grey Order formed a triangle of power, each watching the others warily, but none quite willing to risk full-scale war that might benefit the third party. This balance lasted for years, even as Anakin's power and influence continued to grow. Anakin took on students who showed potential for walking the balanced path. Among them was a young woman named Mira, whose past as a bounty hunter had given her a pragmatic view of morality that made her ideal for Anakin's teachings. There was also Atton, a former Sith assassin who had abandoned the Empire after witnessing one too many atrocities, seeking redemption without quite fitting into the Jedi mold. Together they formed the core of the Grey Order, creating a new kind of Force tradition that incorporated the best aspects of both light and dark while rejecting the worst. They aided those in need without the Jedi's sometimes paralytic contemplation. They used their power decisively without the Sith's casual cruelty. They maintained attachments, loved freely, but did not allow those bonds to cloud their judgment or drive them to selfish action. Years became decades. Anakin aged, his power reaching heights that made him arguably the most formidable Force user in the galaxy. Stories spread of his accomplishments. He had single-handedly stopped a planetary bombardment by seizing the attacking ships in the Force and holding them immobile until their crews surrendered. He had walked into Sith territory unarmed and negotiated the release of captives through sheer force of personality and the implicit threat of what he might do if peaceful methods failed. But he also learned from his failures. A rescue mission that went wrong, resulting in civilian casualties despite his best efforts, taught him that power alone could not prevent all tragedy. A student who embraced the dark side too fully and had to be stopped reminded him that his path was not for everyone, that some personalities needed the structure of traditional Jedi or Sith teaching to function effectively. Darth Malgus, now ancient by human standards but sustained by dark side techniques, requested a meeting with Anakin on neutral ground. They met on Tython, the ancestral home of the Jedi Order, in ruins that had stood for millennia before either of them was born. Two titans of the Force, one representing the evolution of dark side philosophy, the other embodying a synthesis of light and dark, faced each other not as enemies, but as something stranger.
"I was wrong about you," Malgus admitted, his voice still strong despite his advanced age. "I thought you would join us, become the greatest Sith Lord in history."
But you chose a different path, one I did not anticipate. "You were not entirely wrong," Anakin replied. "I am what I am because of our conversation when I was young, because you showed me that questioning Jedi orthodoxy was not inherently evil. In a way, you are one of my teachers, even if what I learned was not what you intended to teach." They spoke for hours discussing philosophy, comparing their understanding of the Force, acknowledging the fundamental truth that both had approached from different angles. The Force was not binary. Light and dark were categories imposed by mortals trying to understand something vastly more complex. True power, true wisdom, came from acknowledging the whole spectrum, the infinite shades between extremes. Before they parted, Malgus offered Anakin a gift.
"I am old," the Sith Lord said, "and even the dark side cannot sustain me forever.
When I die, my knowledge will be lost unless I find a worthy vessel to preserve it. I offer you my holocron, Anakin Skywalker. Not to tempt you toward darkness, but to ensure that what I have learned about the Force is not wasted."
You have proven you can handle such knowledge without being corrupted by it.
Anakin accepted the holocron, understanding the significance of the gesture. By entrusting his life's work to someone who walked the gray path, Malgus was acknowledging that perhaps the future belonged not to pure Sith or pure Jedi, but to those who could integrate both philosophies into something new. Malgus died 2 years later, falling in battle against a younger Sith Lord who challenged his position. In his final moments, he smiled, knowing that his legacy would survive through Anakin's Grey Order, that his ideas about the dark side as a tool rather than a corruptor would influence generations to come. Anakin Skywalker lived to an old age, his connection to the Force keeping him strong and vital long past normal human lifespan. He saw the galaxy evolve, witnessed the slow transformation of both Jedi and Sith Orders as his teachings spread, watched as more Force users began to question the old dichotomies and seek balance rather than choosing sides. When he finally felt death approaching, he gathered his students around him, offering final wisdom that synthesized everything he had learned.
"I was born to bring balance to the Force," he told them, his voice still carrying the authority that had defined his life.
For years, I thought that meant destroying one side or the other. The Jedi believed it meant eliminating the Sith. The Sith thought it meant overthrowing the Jedi, but balance does not come through destruction. It comes through integration, through acknowledging that light and dark are not enemies but complementary forces that together create wholeness. He looked at each of his students, seeing in them the future of his vision. Some of you will be remembered as heroes. Others will be condemned as villains. But if you have truly learned what I tried to teach, you will know that such labels are insufficient. You are not defined by which side of the Force you draw upon, but by what you do with that power, by whether your actions increase suffering or reduce it, by whether you use strength to dominate or to protect. Anakin Skywalker died peacefully, surrounded by those who loved him, his essence joining the Force with the clarity of one who had fulfilled his purpose.
His body did not disappear as Jedi Masters were said to do, nor was it preserved through dark side techniques.
It simply passed as all organic matter must, returning to the cycle of life that even the Force could not truly escape. But his legacy endured. The Grey Order he founded continued to grow, attracting Force users who had chafed under traditional Jedi restrictions or Sith cruelty. While both the Jedi Order and the Sith Empire still existed, they found themselves increasingly influenced by Grey philosophy, their teachings evolving to incorporate Anakin's insights. Centuries later, historians would debate what would have happened if Anakin Skywalker had made different choices, if he had fully embraced the dark side when Malgus first tempted him, if he had remained a traditional Jedi, suppressing his emotions and attachments, if he had died young before his potential could fully manifest. But in the timeline that actually unfolded, Anakin Skywalker's greatest achievement was not any single battle won or threat defeated. It was the simple demonstration that the eternal war between light and dark was not inevitable, that there existed paths beyond the binary choice that had defined the Force for millennia. He proved that someone could love without being controlled by attachment, could feel anger without being consumed by hatred, could acknowledge fear without letting it dictate their actions, could draw upon both light and dark aspects of the Force without becoming a monster or a martyr. In doing so, he fulfilled the prophecy of the Chosen One in a way that neither Jedi nor Sith had anticipated. He brought balance not by destroying one side, but by showing that both sides could exist in harmony within a single being, that the galaxy did not have to be forever divided between opposing forces locked in eternal conflict. And so the galaxy evolved not into a utopia free of conflict, but into a more nuanced reality where Force users were judged by their actions rather than their affiliations, where power was understood as a tool that could be wielded for good or evil regardless of its source. Anakin Skywalker, born in the Old Republic era, became not just a legend, but a catalyst for transformation. His life demonstrated that destiny was not fixed, that prophecies could be fulfilled in unexpected ways, and that the choices of a single individual, even one blessed with extraordinary power, mattered less than how they chose to use that power. The establishment of the Grey Order required more than philosophy. It demanded practical application, real-world demonstrations that Anakin's balanced approach could function in the complexities of galactic politics. His first major test came when a colony world found itself caught between Republic and Empire, each demanding allegiance, each threatening consequences for choosing the other side. Traditional Jedi would have urged the colonists to trust in the Republic, to have faith that democracy would protect them. Traditional Sith would have conquered the world outright, adding it to Imperial holdings through overwhelming force. Anakin chose a third path. He arrived on the colony with a small group of Grey Knights, as his followers had begun calling themselves, and offered protection to the colonists regardless of their political affiliation. When both Republic and Imperial forces arrived expecting submission, they found instead a population defended by Force users who would not yield to intimidation from either side. Anakin stood in the space between opposing fleets, his presence in the Force so overwhelming that both commanders hesitated to fire weapons that might miss their targets and hit him instead. The standoff lasted 3 days, during which Anakin negotiated a compromise. The colony would remain independent, trading with both Republic and Empire, aligned with neither. Both sides would withdraw their forces and allow the people to choose their own future. The success of this intervention established a pattern that would repeat across the galaxy. Worlds caught in the eternal conflict between light and dark found sanctuary under Grey Order protection. Anakin's followers became known as arbiters, mediators who could work with both Jedi and Sith because they understood the philosophies driving each side. This role was not without its dangers. There were purists on both sides who viewed the Grey Order as heretics, dangerous deviations from true paths. Several assassination attempts targeted Anakin over the years, some by Jedi who feared his influence would corrupt their students, others by Sith who saw him as a threat to their power structure. The most dangerous of these attempts came from an unexpected source. Kavi, the Twi'lek girl Anakin had saved all those years ago at the Dantooine ruins, had never truly recovered from witnessing what he had done to the mercenaries. That moment of fear had planted seeds that grew into conviction. She believed that Anakin's power made him fundamentally unstable, that his balanced approach was merely a mask for darkness waiting to consume him. She gathered a group of like-minded Jedi, forming a secret council dedicated to eliminating Anakin before he could fall completely to the dark side. Their plan was sophisticated, involving manipulation of events to put Anakin in positions where he would have to choose between saving loved ones and maintaining his balance. They believed that eventually he would make the wrong choice, would give in to darkness to save someone he cared about, and in that moment they would strike, eliminating the threat he represented. Anakin discovered the conspiracy through the Force, sensing the web of intentions coalescing around him. When he confronted Kavi, their conversation revealed the tragedy of misunderstanding that had defined their relationship since that day at the ruins. "You saved me," Kavi said, her voice trembling with emotions held back for years. "But the way you did it, the power you used, the ease with which you killed, it terrified me, Anakin. I have spent every day since wondering when that darkness would consume you completely, when you would become the monster I saw glimpses of that day." Anakin felt her fear through the Force, recognized it as genuine, and understood that no words could convince her. He could only demonstrate through his choices, through how he responded to this betrayal, whether he was the person he claimed to be or the threat she feared. He could have killed them all, could have struck preemptively, eliminating the conspiracy before it could mature into actual danger. The dark side whispered that such action would be justified, defensive, protecting the Grey Order and everything he had built. But that would prove Kavi right, would demonstrate that when threatened, he defaulted to violence. Instead, Anakin chose transparency. He revealed the conspiracy to the Jedi Council, presented evidence of the plot, and then asked them to judge whether he deserved death. He offered no defense, made no threats, simply placed his fate in the hands of those who feared him most. The council deliberated for days. Master Vrook, now ancient and near the end of his life, argued that Kavi's fears were justified even if her methods were not. But Master Vandar, miraculously still alive through his species' long lifespan and connection to the Force, spoke in Anakin's defense. Not because he believed Anakin was infallible, but because the choice to submit to judgment rather than fight, demonstrated the very balance he had spent his life teaching. The final verdict cleared Anakin of wrongdoing, but did not punish Kavii and her conspirators. Instead, they were assigned to work with the Grey Order to observe firsthand whether their fears were justified. It was Anakin's suggestion, a demonstration of the reconciliation he believed possible even between bitter opponents. Over time, some of the conspirators came to accept Anakin's philosophy. Others never did, maintaining their vigilance but ceasing their active opposition. Kavii herself spent years shadowing Anakin, watching his every decision, and slowly, reluctantly began to understand that her fear had blinded her to his genuine attempts to walk a balanced path. She never fully joined the Grey Order, remaining nominally aligned with traditional Jedi teachings, but when she eventually became a master herself, her teachings incorporated elements of what she had learned from observing Anakin. Balance, she taught her students, was not achieved through suppression but through acknowledgement and integration. Anakin's influence extended beyond Force users. His demonstration that power could be wielded without cruelty or naivety inspired political movements throughout the galaxy. Democratic reformers in the Republic cited his example when arguing for stronger responses to imperial aggression. Moderates in the Empire pointed to his success when advocating for diplomatic solutions over military conquest. This cross-pollination of ideas gradually transformed both governments. The Republic, which had grown complacent in its democratic traditions, began to recognize that peace required strength to defend it. The Empire, which had glorified conquest and domination, started to question whether ruling through fear was sustainable in the long term. Neither changed completely, but both evolved in ways that reduced, if not eliminated, the constant state of war that had defined millennia of galactic history. Anakin's personal life during these years was complex. He formed deep bonds with his students and fellow Grey Knights, relationships that were more than the traditional master-Padawan dynamic, but less than the attachments that had doomed so many Force users to darkness. He loved, but he learned to love without possessing. He formed partnerships, but he accepted that all beings must ultimately walk their own paths. There was Mira, whose practical wisdom often grounded Anakin when his idealism threatened to blind him to political realities. There was Atton, whose journey from Sith assassin to Grey Knight mirrored in some ways Anakin's own path of integrating darkness and light. And there were others, dozens of students who carried forward his teachings, each adding their own understanding to the evolving philosophy of the Grey Order. One of Anakin's most controversial decisions was establishing a formal alliance with certain Sith Lords who shared Malgus's vision of a more nuanced approach to the dark side. Not all Sith embraced casual cruelty or sought domination for its own sake. Some genuinely believed that strength through conflict could be applied constructively, that the dark side's emphasis on passion and personal power could motivate achievement without requiring evil. These Sith did not abandon their nature, did not suddenly become light side users, but they agreed to limitations on their actions, accepting that while individual strength was valuable, using that strength to oppress others undermined the very philosophy they claimed to follow. A strong individual proved their worth through accomplishment, not through crushing the weak. The alliance horrified traditionalists on both sides. Jedi saw it as collaboration with evil. Orthodox Sith viewed it as weakness, betrayal of everything the dark side represented. But Anakin maintained that if balance was to be more than a theoretical concept, it required acknowledging that beings could draw upon dark side power without becoming monsters. This pragmatic approach to Force philosophy culminated in the Treaty of Tithon, a historic agreement signed by representatives from the Jedi Order, the Sith Empire, and the Grey Order. The treaty did not end conflict between the factions, but it established rules of engagement, boundaries that would not be crossed, protections for neutral worlds and civilian populations. Anakin's role in negotiating the treaty cemented his position as one of the most influential beings in galactic history. He sat at tables with the Grand Master of the Jedi and the Dark Lord of the Sith, respected by both, trusted by neither, but acknowledged by all as someone whose power demanded consideration.
As Anakin aged, he began to contemplate his legacy in more concrete terms.
What would happen to the Grey Order after his death? Would it survive without his presence to hold together its diverse membership? Would his students maintain the delicate balance he had demonstrated, or would they drift toward either light or darkness, fracturing the synthesis he had achieved? He decided to create a holocron, a repository of his knowledge and experiences that could guide future generations. Unlike traditional Jedi or Sith holocrons, which often contained rigid teachings meant to be followed exactly, Anakin's holocron was designed to challenge its users, to ask questions rather than provide answers, to encourage personal interpretation rather than dogmatic adherence. The process of creating the holocron required him to examine his entire life, to extract lessons from both triumphs and failures. He recorded not just his successes but his mistakes, not just his wisdom but his doubts. The holocron that resulted was perhaps the most honest repository of Force knowledge ever created, acknowledging the messy reality of moral choices rather than pretending that right and wrong were always clear. In his final years, Anakin established what would become the Grey Temple on a remote world equidistant from Republic and Imperial space. The temple was designed to be accessible to Force users from all traditions, a place where Jedi and Sith could study side by side, where those seeking balance could find teachers and resources.
The architecture itself reflected Anakin's philosophy.
Light and shadow interplayed throughout the structure, neither dominating, each defining and enhancing the other. Training rooms where students could practice combat shared space with meditation chambers designed for deep contemplation. Libraries containing forbidden Sith texts sat alongside archives of Jedi wisdom, all available to those deemed ready to handle such knowledge without being consumed by it. When death finally approached, Anakin chose to face it in the Grey Temple, surrounded by the physical manifestation of everything he had worked to build. His students gathered, representing the full spectrum of Force philosophy. Former Jedi who had joined his cause. Repentant Sith seeking redemption. Those who had followed the Grey Path from the beginning, even some who remained skeptical of his teachings but respected what he had achieved. His final words, already shared in this narrative, were followed by a peaceful passing that brought closure to a life that had spanned nearly a century. But in the hours before his death, Anakin performed one last act that would resonate through the ages. He reached out through the Force, touching the minds of Force-sensitive children being born across the galaxy.
Not to control them or direct their futures, but simply to plant a seed.
The knowledge that choice mattered more than destiny. That power was a tool, neither good nor evil in itself. That balance was achieved not through denying one aspect of reality, but through integrating all aspects into a functional whole. These children, scattered across thousands of worlds, would grow up with an intuitive understanding of Anakin's philosophy, even if they never heard his name. They would become the next generation of Force users, and their presence would ensure that his legacy continued long after the Grey Order itself might fade into history. The galaxy that Anakin Skywalker left behind was not perfect. Conflict still existed. Injustice still flourished in many corners of civilized space. The eternal struggle between light and dark continued, as it always would so long as sentient beings possessed free will and the capacity for both good and evil. but it was a galaxy fundamentally transformed by one individual's refusal to accept the binary choices that had defined Force philosophy for millennia. The Jedi Order, while still clinging to many traditional teachings, incorporated elements of gray philosophy into their training, acknowledging that emotions were not inherently dangerous if properly understood and channeled. The Sith Empire, while remaining committed to strength through conflict, accepted limitations on the exercise of that strength, recognizing that unlimited cruelty weakened rather than strengthened their position. And scattered throughout the galaxy on hundreds of worlds, the Grey Knights continued their work, mediating conflicts, protecting the vulnerable, demonstrating through their actions that power could be wielded responsibly, that strength and compassion were not mutually exclusive, that acknowledging darkness within oneself was the first step toward mastering it rather than being mastered by it. Historians would debate for generations what might have happened if Anakin Skywalker had made different choices at key moments in his life. If he had given in to Malgus's initial temptation, if he had rejected the dark side entirely and remained a traditional Jedi, if he had died young, before his philosophy could spread. But these counterfactuals, while intellectually interesting, missed the essential truth of what Anakin had demonstrated. He proved that destiny was not fixed, that prophecies could be fulfilled in unexpected ways. He showed that the choices of a single individual, even one blessed or cursed with extraordinary power, mattered less than how they chose to use that power. He demonstrated that balance was achievable, not through eliminating opposition, but through integrating contradictions into a functional synthesis. In a galaxy that had been locked in eternal conflict between light and dark, Anakin Skywalker stood as a beacon of a third way, not compromise, which suggested weakness or surrender of principles, but integration, the recognition that opposing forces could coexist and even strengthen each other when held in proper tension. His life was a testament to the power of choice, to the possibility of transformation, to the idea that no being was defined solely by their nature or their circumstances, but by the decisions they made moment by moment, day by day, across the span of their existence. And so Anakin Skywalker, the chosen one born in the Old Republic era, fulfilled his destiny not by destroying one side or the other in the eternal conflict between light and dark, but by demonstrating that the conflict itself was not inevitable, that there existed paths beyond the binary. That balance was not a state to be achieved and maintained through constant struggle, but a dynamic process of integration and evolution. His legacy lived on not just in the institutions he founded or the students he trained, but in the fundamental transformation of how the galaxy understood the Force itself. Where once there had been only Jedi or Sith, light or dark, now there existed a spectrum of possibilities. Where once beings believed they must choose between opposing extremes, now they could seek balance, could draw upon the full range of their potential without being consumed by any single aspect of it. This was the true prophecy fulfilled, the balance brought not through destruction but through demonstration. Anakin Skywalker showed the galaxy what was possible when one refused to accept limitations imposed by tradition, when one dared to walk paths that others insisted did not exist, when one chose integration over division, understanding over extremism. If you enjoyed this journey through an alternate history, consider supporting the channel by liking this video and subscribing for more deep dives into Star Wars lore. What other alternate histories would you like to explore? What if Revan had never fallen to the dark side? What if the Sith Empire had won the Great Hyperspace War? Leave your suggestions in the comments below, and may the Force in all its balanced glory be with you.